This week we're finishing up our series called The Struggle is Real. And I don't know about you, but I've really enjoyed this series. We've been talking about how we all have struggles in life. And we looked at how we can overcome and get through those struggles as we look at the Bible and apply the Bible to our lives. How many of you have been here for some of those? How many of you have been enjoying this series so far? I've been having a great time with this series. I really enjoy it. I just want to let you know, because a few people have asked me, all of these series were recorded, so they will be uploaded this week, this entire series. So if you want to ever go back and rewatch it, or maybe you missed a week, you can go ahead and do that, and you can rewatch that or get caught up in that way. So they'll all be either on the YouTube or the Nickel City Church app, so you can find them that way. But we're going to jump right into this for our last week. Now, in life, I tend to be a shopper. Any shoppers here? Yeah, we got a few of us here. I love a good deal, particularly. I love looking for a good deal. And so oftentimes, as I'm out shopping in life, I will come back with things that I don't necessarily need, but happen to really want to get them because they are on sale or because they got a really good deal on it. And an example of this is this. When I go to the thrift store, I love the thrift store. For me, the thrift store is my favorite place to shop because I say it's like a treasure hunt. You never know what you're going to find at the thrift store. And so I'll go to the thrift store and I'll find some random things and I'll bring them home to my wife. And my wife, Deanna, she'll look at me and go, "Oh, that's nice. What are you going to do with it?" And typically my answer is, "Well, I don't know, but it was only 99 cents. So we're going to figure out what to do with it." So we'll have those conversations often, and I'll come home with different things. And it's not uncommon for me sometimes, in the sake of finding a good deal, to buy things that we maybe already have as well. See, I accidentally started a collection of ice cream scoops. Yeah, I have about 13 ice cream scoops in my home currently because every time I go to the thrift store, I see a new one or a different color or a different style, and I'll see them and I'll go, "Oh, it's only 29 cents, and I can't pass up an ice cream scoop that's only 29 cents. And so I'll end up buying them, and we'll find that we have multiples of things. And how many of you are in the same boat? You've ever done something like this before? Okay. So you know what I'm talking about. See, and then what happens is I'll buy these things that we don't really actually need, and we'll kind of collect them, and then they don't actually get used. And so they'll end up in the basement, and then as we're cleaning out the basement, one of two things will happen. The first thing that will happen is I'll say, "Wow, look, there's more ice cream scoops," or I'll find something down there that kind of got shifted down there, or I'll find out that I never should have bought that in the first place, and it will end up in a pile to go right back to the thrift store. And so why is this? Why do we kind of go through this cycle in our lives? Well, you know, for me, I think that oftentimes it comes from the fear of missing out. Fear of missing out on a good deal, or even the idea of letting something that has value, letting it go. And sometimes I kind of deal with that idea. Sometimes it's because I'm not content with what I already have. That's how you acquire 13 ice cream scoops, is because you constantly are buying the next one thinking it's going to be better than the last. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the idea of having enough. And really the idea of this is contentment. And you know, contentment is something that affects a lot of different areas of our lives. Maybe for you, you're like me, and you just love getting a deal, or you don't want to let that bargain get away. And so maybe it's in your possessions that you struggle with contentment. Or maybe you have a desire to have even more, and you feel like the more that you have, the more fulfilled in life you're starting to feel. You know, we can even see this idea of contentment in the type of things that we buy. Maybe you're the type of person that feels like you need to buy the very best of the very best. And so you buy the top of the line things thinking that if I have this, if I have the best of it, then I'll be happier, then I'll feel fulfilled in my life. Maybe it's the newest tech or the latest computer or latest phone, and you feel like if you don't have it, like you're missing out in life. Or maybe you feel like you aren't worth as much because you don't have these things. See, we struggle with contentment in our possessions, but that's not the only area. See, we also struggle with contentment in our position. Maybe you have a difficult job and you feel like you deserve a promotion. Maybe you feel like, I shouldn't be the one taking orders, I should be the one giving the orders. Maybe you struggle with contentment in the position that you are currently in. Maybe it's that you have the need to constantly move up. And you feel like, well, if I can just move up to the next position, or if I can become a manager, or if I can become an assistant manager or an owner, then in my life I'll be content. And so you're constantly searching for that next position or that next role, and we see contentment show up in this way. Maybe it's even in your relationships. We can see contentment come into our relationships as well. Maybe you started off in a relationship and everything was perfect and everything was happy. Maybe you got married and things were going well for a time, but as time went on, things started to fall apart a little bit. Problems started to arise. And so you've started facing this idea of contentment even within your own marriage, and you say, well, maybe I married the wrong person. Or maybe you start to question, well, I don't know if I can truly be happy in this relationship anymore. Or maybe you start to search for those things that are lacking in your marriage. You start to look for them in other places. And you start to look for attention from other people. And the idea is that you feel like you can't be happy in the place or in the relationship that you are in. So you start looking for it in other places. We face contentment in a lot of different areas in our lives. And it's difficult. It's a difficult thing because we all struggle with contentment to some extent. And it's not just in physical ways, but it starts in our heart. And so today what I want to do is I want to take a look at the Bible, because I believe that the Bible has every answer that we need for the problems that we face in life. And so I want to dig into this, and we're going to look in the book of Philippians. Now, the book of Philippians was written by a man named Paul. And Paul's a little bit confusing because Paul actually kind of had two names. His first name was Saul, and he's actually the same guy that Christina, our connections coordinator, talked about last week. She preached about the story of Saul and about how God changed his life. But Saul changed his name to Paul whenever he started becoming a missionary, when he started traveling around the world and telling people about Jesus. So Paul is the writer of this. And here's what he says in the book of Philippians, Philippians chapter 4. It says, "Not that I was ever in need, for I'd learned how to be content with whatever I have." Everyone say content. I've learned to be content with whatever I have. I know how to live on almost nothing or with everything. Goes on and says, I've learned the secret. Everyone say secret. I've learned the secret of living in every situation, whether it is with a full stomach or empty, with plenty or little. For I can do, and maybe you know this part, for I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. All right, man. I don't know that I can say this, that I've learned to be content in any situation, regardless of my circumstance, regardless of what's happening. I've learned to be content in my life. I don't know that I can say that today. You know, actually, I don't know if any of us would be able to say this. Look at some of these things. He says, whether it's with a full stomach or empty. Now, I know some of you guys, all right? I've been around you when you're hungry. They have a word for this, right? It's called hangry. When you get angry, when you're hungry. I know some of you guys, and I've seen you get a little bit hangry. So for all of us, I'm sure that we've struggled. None of us can say, hey, I've learned the secret of how to be content on an empty stomach or on a full stomach, with a lot or with a little. It really doesn't matter. I'm content in any situation. That's a pretty big statement, but Paul says that he learned the secret. And I like that he uses the word secret, because secret is something that not everyone knows. A secret is a rarity, or it's something that we need to uncover or discover for ourselves. And so he says, I've learned the secret, and the secret is this. It's that I can do all things through Jesus who gives me the strength to endure. And I like this because he doesn't just say the strength to endure, to get through. But see, this word right here says, I've learned the secret to living, the secret of living. This word living in the Greek is actually a Greek word called peruso. And it literally means living in abundance. It means living in excess or in large measure. So Paul here is not just saying, hey, I've just learned to push through or get through, but he's saying I've learned to live in abundance, in excess, even in the toughest situations. Now for us, that might seem like an oxymoron. We might say, well, that doesn't really make sense, right? If he's living in abundance, but he has nothing, how does that really work? But that's what he's saying here. That's what that word literally means. I've learned the secret of living my best life in the midst of my worst circumstances. See, Paul shows us the example of how to be content, and it has nothing to do with his own ability. You know, oftentimes in life, my solution is to suck it up and deal with it. You know, my wife hates this. We'll face problems together. We'll kind of face difficult situations, and we'll assess the ideas and how we can get through them. And more often than not, I will end up saying something like, okay, well, we just got to push through. All right, well, it's going to be tough, but we just got to make it happen. That's typically my attitude. You know, I had older siblings, and they would always tell me this. They'd say, Eli, you need to build a bridge and get over it. Yeah, so maybe that's where I get it from. But that's not what Paul is saying here. He's saying, listen, it's not just a matter of building a bridge and getting over it. He said, I want you to learn the secret as well. And it's not just pushing through, it's to live in abundance in the midst of your circumstances. Then he goes on and he says this last verse that maybe many of us have heard. He says, for I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. Or maybe you've heard this, maybe you've went to the gym, and as you're at the gym, you see someone with a shirt on that says something like this, and they're getting ready to pop a squat. And they're like, all right, let's do this. I can do all things through Christ. They're getting ready to lift those weights. Or maybe you're scrolling through Instagram, and you see someone saying, I'm about to run a 5K marathon. Hashtag can do all things. Maybe you've seen something like that, right? But that's not what this verse is actually talking about. See, Paul is saying it's not about your own ability. It's not talking about giving you supernatural strength or even physical endurance to get through. This verse is about contentment. He's saying you can get through any situation. You can get through and endure it. Not just endure, but live in abundance in any situations because of Christ's power in you. And so here's what we're going to kind of dive into here. Today's big idea is this. It's that God has given me everything I need to endure the situations that I face. God has given me everything that I need to endure the situations that I face. And it's not just to endure, but it's to live in abundance in the midst of those situations. So as we look at our possessions and maybe as we look at the idea of the things that we have or the things that we don't have or even the things that we desire to have, well, we can look at that verse and the end of it and say, you know what? I'm trusting and believing that even in the midst of the things that I desire, I believe that God will get me through his strength. That all of my possessions, all the things that I have and all the things that I want, I trust that God will help me to endure and he's going to give me everything that I need to get through. It means that in your work situation, when you are at work and you feel stuck, you feel like you can't take another day with that boss, you can't take another day with your coworkers. It means that verse is for you, that you can get through this. You can do it because of the power of God that's available to you. You can do all things through Christ who gives you the strength. It means that in your marriage, and your marriage has fallen apart, that you feel like you don't know if you can go on any longer. You feel like you're just stuck. It means that God is giving you this verse that you can get through this situation. Even in the midst of your mess, even in the midst of the hardships, you can live an abundant life, even in the midst of your circumstances. God has given me everything I need to endure the situations that I face, because you can do all things through Christ who gives you strength. All things through Jesus. Now, as I look at Paul's life, and I look at how confidently he says this. Hey, I can endure all situations. It doesn't matter how bad it is. It doesn't matter if I'm hungry or if I'm full, if I have nothing or a lot. As I look at this, he says it with such confidence. And it made me start to question, how could he say this so confidently? And so I started to look at the life of Paul, and I think there's 3 things that Paul does extremely well that I think help him have the ability to say this fully, to say, I can endure and I will endure through the power of Jesus. And so I want to share those with you today. 3 things that Paul does, but I think that we should do as well. The first one is this, is that Paul did what was right. Paul did what was right in his life. You know, actually, as Paul was writing this letter, he was actually on house arrest. He was on house arrest for 2 years, means he can't go out of his house. There's an armed guard in his home at all times. He was under house arrest right in the heart of Rome. He was in house arrest because he was preaching and talking about Jesus. Now, if you know your history, you know that during this time that this letter was written, there was also a lot of persecution that was happening towards Christians. In fact, only a few years later, they started construction on the Roman Colosseum, where they tortured and killed Christians. But that was already happening at this time. Christians were being burned at the stake. They were being imprisoned or killed or sold in slavery. They were going through tremendous injustices, and a lot of things were happening to them. And Paul was right there at the heart of all of it. But yet he could still write this letter. But the reason why he was in prison was because he was talking about Jesus. So he says, listen, I'm doing what's right. And I know that because I'm in this situation, because I've done what was right in God's eyes. He did what was right, and that's actually what led him to his bad situation. See, I think sometimes we think, well, man, if I'm struggling or if I'm going through a hardship, that means that I've done something wrong. But sometimes doing what's right actually leads you to a hardship. But he says with confidence, God will help me get through this. I trust and know that I can be content to endure and live in abundance, even in the midst of my situations. And I think he could say that because he knew that he was doing what was right. You know, I think a lot of times in our lives, we ask God to show up. We expect God to show up and to save us from our circumstances. We say, God, I need you. God, come help me to get through this problem or to get through this circumstance. And I think oftentimes we're left waiting. And I think sometimes that's due to the fact that we aren't doing what's right on our end. We aren't making the right choices. We aren't choosing the right attitudes. We aren't responding in the right way. We're saying, God, help me get through this, but then we aren't actually doing anything right on our end. We're still gossiping and we're still complaining and we still refuse to do the things that we know God is telling us to do. So I'd encourage you today, if you aren't finding contentment, it could be because you aren't doing what's right in your own life. I want you to think about it this way in your job. Maybe you're struggling at your work and maybe things are difficult and there's tension with your boss. Well, I want you to think about this. If you're just spending your time arguing with your boss and complaining and talking behind his back and you're holding anger and bitterness in your heart towards your boss, well, guess what? You're never going to find contentment at your work. You're never going to find contentment because you aren't doing what God is telling you to do, to honor your boss and to honor your authorities, even when they're wrong. You aren't going to find contentment as you keep doing the wrong things. Think about it in your marriage. If your marriage is falling apart and things are tough and in your relationship and you say, well, you know what? I just feel like giving up. I don't know that I can keep going on like this. Well, my spouse isn't doing what they're supposed to do. My husband, my wife, they aren't doing what they should do. So I just want to give up. I don't want to be a part of it anymore. If you are doing that and you have that attitude and you're walking away and maybe you're looking for the contentment in other relationships and you're kind of wandering and even your heart is wandering away, you're never going to find contentment in your marriage if you aren't doing what's right in your marriage regardless of what anyone else does. See, Paul, I think, was able to say this with such confidence because we know he was doing what was right. He was right where God had him. He accepted the results of doing what was right. He said, I don't care if I'm in prison. I don't care if I'm hungry. I don't care if I'm full. I don't care if I own anything or if I don't. Because I'm going to do what's right, and I trust that God is going to see me through and let me live in abundance in the midst of it. Paul did what was right in his life, and I think we need to start doing the same thing if we want to step into this full contentment. The first thing that Paul did is he did what was right. The second thing is that Paul practiced contentment. He practiced it. You know, he actually goes on and he says, I've learned the secret to being content. I've learned the secret. And the word learned in the Greek, it literally means to learn by practicing or to learn and be tested in. So he's not just saying, hey, listen, I've stumbled upon this idea and I think it's a great idea. He says, no, I've worked at this. I've learned. I've put it into practice and I've proven that it works. I've learned it and then I've been tested in the area. And that's how I can say that I'm confident in this principle. He learned it and he practiced it. He put it into practice. He paid attention and was tested in this idea. Listen, I'm sure of this. I'm sure that Paul was not always right in his life. Paul was a normal guy. Paul was a normal dude. I'm sure his attitude was not always spot on. I'm sure that his heart and his attitude, and maybe he complained here or there. I'm sure that he messed up at some points, but he says this, I've practiced this. This is how I am so confident to say this. I've learned it by practicing. I've learned it and I've put it into practice and I've been tested in this and I found it to be true still. Paul practiced contentment. He paid attention and he learned and he practiced the will of God. He did what was right even when he didn't feel like it. He put it into practice in his own life. And I think we need to do the same thing. Listen, it might not come easy to us, just like any other skill. It's something that we need to work on, to practice. And it doesn't come from our own ability, but it comes from us practicing, leaning into the power of God. Leaning in and saying, listen, I'm going to choose to do what's right, even in the midst of my circumstances. Even when I feel like doing something contrary, I'm going to make a choice and put it into practice so I can step into this contentment that is available to me. Paul practiced it. And I think as we do that same thing, I think we too can one day say, I've learned the secret. I've practiced it and been tested in it, and I found it to be true. Paul practiced it. And the third one, and the last one we're going to talk about today is this, is that Paul understood the power of God. Paul understood the power of God. And I love this part because Paul doesn't make this about himself. And Paul, of all people in the Bible, he's one of the most accomplished people. He had all the credentials. He had all the titles. He could have done anything and to bring it back to himself, to bring the attention back to him. He could have said, hey, listen, I've learned the secret. And it's building a bridge and getting over it. You just got to work at it, dude. He could have said that. He could have said, hey, listen, I've learned the secret and I've become super self-disciplined in my regiment. I've learned the secret and I've just looked inwardly and I found nirvana in my heart. And I've really just become at peace with myself. He could have said, I've worked at it and figured out these secrets. He could have said, listen, I've worked at it and I've changed my mindset and I wrote this 18-step plan. If you just subscribe to my podcasts, or if you just go and purchase my new book, you'll find the secret too. He doesn't make it about himself at all. He says, listen, I've learned the secret, and it has nothing to do with my own ability. I've learned the secret of being content in life, and it has nothing to do with my own ability. He said, I've learned the secret that's this, that I can do all things. I can thrive in life. Whatever happens, whatever my circumstances, whatever goes on in my life, I'm not going to let them change me, because my circumstances don't change who God is. He says, I've learned to be content because of Jesus. I love this. But you know, there's a difference between complacency and contentment. See, complacency is saying, hey, I don't really care what happens. It says it doesn't matter what happens, whether it's good, whether it's bad. It doesn't matter. What happens will happen. I'm just going to roll with it. Complacency says, que sera, whatever will be, will be. It doesn't really matter. I'll get through it one way or another. See, complacency is about apathy. It's about not caring at all. But Paul tells us to do the exact opposite. He says, I want you to be content. And it's not the idea that you don't care about what's going to happen to you. He says it's actually the exact opposite. I want you to know that contentment is about knowing what's going to happen and still choosing to put your trust in God. Contentment is saying, I know what's going to happen, but still, even in the midst of my circumstances, even in the midst of the hardships, even in the worst things I can possibly imagine, I'm trusting that God is going to turn around and use my circumstances for glory, for good in my life. It's saying, contentment is saying, I know that even in the midst of the hardest things that I face, I can live a life of abundance because of the strength that Jesus gives me. Contentment is saying, listen, I trust that God is going to get me through this. And He's going to help me to live my best life even in the middle of it. Paul's not saying don't care about what happens to you. He's saying care so much that you put your trust in the one person who can actually change it. Listen, I want to encourage you today not to be complacent in your life. I don't want you to sit here and say, hey, I don't really care. Yeah, I'll get through whatever. That's not what I'm asking you to do. I'm asking you to take a step and to understand the power of God. To understand that God has the ability to change your circumstances. And He has the ability to get you through whatever circumstances you face. I want you to know today that whatever you go through, whatever you face, the power of God isn't affected by it. Doesn't matter how big your circumstances are, how big your problems are. God doesn't change because of your problems. See, and Paul understood the power of God where he said, listen, the things that are going to happen to me, I know that they're going to happen, but I'm trusting and believing because I've tested it and I've proven that God helps me to live in abundance even in the midst of my hardest times. So God has given you everything that you need to endure the situations that you face. And as we look at the life of Paul, I'd encourage you to do those same things. That as we go on this journey of contentment, that we would do the same things, that we would do what was right. Listen, if there's an area or situation in your life that you're feeling discontented in, you're saying, Eli, I just don't know, like this situation is just rough. I don't know how I'm going to get through it. Let me encourage you to start by doing what's right. Change your heart, change your attitude. Do the things that are pleasing to God in the situation. Start there. And then start practicing this idea of contentment. Start practicing and stepping into letting God give you the strength to not just push through or get over it, but to live abundantly in the midst of it. And I want you to know above all other things that the power of God is available to you. That God's not forgotten about you. He's not left you. Lean into it. Lean into the power of God that's there. I believe as we do these things and as we remember that God's already given us everything we need to get us through the situations that we face. As we do this, I believe we'll start to see our circumstances change. I believe that we'll start to find joy in the midst of our hardships. I believe that we're going to find joy and purpose and meaning in the middle of the pains that we face. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. He's made it available to us today. So here's what I want to do. I want to ask you to pray with me as we close. And as we pray here today, maybe just do this. I want to encourage you. You can say it out loud or maybe just under your breath even, or however you want. But just say this. Say, God, I want to experience you right now. Because for me, I don't want you to just come and hear a few points or hear a general idea. I want you to experience the power of God in your life in a new way. And so that's why we're going to take this moment to respond. Just say that to him. Say, God, I want to experience you. I want to experience your power. I want to step into a new life of contentment and understanding this idea that might be contrary to us, that we can live abundantly even when we have nothing. We need you, God. Let's just pray together. God, we're so grateful. God, that you care about us. God, you know our names. You know the situations and the problems that we face. God, you know the struggles that we have in our lives. God, and you know us, but you care enough about us to make yourself available to us. So we're grateful for that, God. God, I pray that you would help us to know that you are enough. God, that there's no possession or no position, no relationship that can take your place. God, there's no problem big enough that can push us away from you. God, you're still sovereign and strong through it all. God, I pray that you'd help us to emulate the life of Paul. God, that we would understand who you are. God, that we would step into a new life of being content. God, help us to put it into practice in our daily lives. Help us to lean into your power and to trust you. God, help us to do what's right on our end. God, let our attitudes and our words and our speech be pleasing to you. God, we need you. We can't do it on our own. So God, I pray that you meet us here today. I pray we have an experience with you right now, even in these last few moments, God. God, we love you and we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. Now, as we close, here's what I want to do. I want to invite our leaders up. We do this every week. Our leaders are going to come up here, and they're going to be available after service. So as we close service, they're going to be up here and available to pray with you. In fact, the leaders came to me and said, listen, Can we keep praying with people? Can we keep coming up front? They've asked to do this. They want to be here to pray with you. So if you're going through a hardship, maybe you're dealing with this idea of contentment in your life and you're struggling in an area, maybe it's just something completely unrelated. The leaders are up here and they want to pray with you for whatever you're going through or whatever you're facing. I just want to also invite you out Wednesday Connect group. We are going to be kicking things back up. So I would encourage you to be there. But also next week, we're starting our brand new series, and it's called Don't Miss This. And we're talking about people in the Bible who missed the principles of God that were right in front of them. And so I would encourage you to come back next Sunday because you're not going to want to miss it. So I want to encourage you to be here next Sunday as well as we start off that new series. But guys, I'm glad you were here. Thank you. We love you guys, and we will see you later. Thanks.